June the 15th, 1944, D-Day. 2 American battleships, 2 cruisers, and 7 destroyers approached the Japanese-held island of Saipan. Behind them was an invasion fleet carrying 70,000 men of the 5th Amphibious Corps. Their mission, to take the island. Ahead of the men waiting in the transports lay their target beaches on the rocky west coast of the island. They knew the Japanese were lying in wait. Before they could land, the Navy had to clear a path. The warships opened up with a deafening gun and rocket barrage.
The sound was just horrific. Very often people described the sound of naval gunfire overhead as sounding like freight trains. And no freight train was ever that horrible to listen to. It was difficult to think with that much overhead noise.
The 8,000 US Marines of the first wave realized this would be no ordinary landing. When they hit the beach, they would be the first American troops to set foot on Japanese territory in World War II. One of the Marianas Islands, 1,200 miles south of Japan, Saipan had been under Japanese control since 1922. It was a vital base on the Pacific Sea routes to the Philippines and the rest of the Japanese Empire.
The Marianas were very much a key portion of the inner ring of Japan's defensive system. So if they lost that, the inner ring was in serious jeopardy of crumbling. Planes based out of the Marianas could actually reach the Japanese home islands for the first time and start bringing the war to the Japanese. So it was very important for the United States.
Commanded by Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, 30,000 Japanese troops defended Saipan. Heavy guns and mortars covered the landing beaches. The rest of the 85-square-mile island was transformed into a maze of interlocking machine gun nests and bunkers. The key to taking Saipan would be the use of aerial photographs. For the first time, these detailed images were used to construct special 3D maps.
We had rubberized relief maps that enabled us to check out every terrain feature on the way to the objective area. The maps were so good that I could actually find little chicken houses that the farmers had in their backyards.
As well as the natural features of this rugged island, the maps showed Japanese trench lines and bunkers near the coast. But though maps could reveal the island's defenses, it was up to men to take them. On board his headquarters ship, Invasion Force Commander Lieutenant General Holland M. Smith, seen here in glasses, told his staff the brutal truth about their mission. We learned how to pulverize atolls, but now we are up against mountains and caves where the Japs can dig in. A week from today, there will be a lot of dead Marines. Waiting to board their assault craft, Marines heard about the dangers of Saipan from another source. The Japanese radio broadcaster they called Tokyo Rose threatened them with defeat.
The foolish American forces are making a sad attempt to gain positions in the Marianas, but the Japanese are too strong for them.
We heard some Tokyo Rose broadcasts when we were aboard ship, and she played good music, popular American music. Her propaganda was so bad that it was humorous.
She said, "You're all going to be killed, and why don't you turn back and go back home to your girlfriends," and crazy things like that.
At 5:40 a.m., the men of the assault force climbed down to their waiting Amtraks, or LVTs. 700 of these amphibious vehicles would take them to the beaches, more than had ever been used in an island assault. Their objectives were beaches on both sides of Afetna Point. To the north was the landing zone of the 2nd Marine Division. To the south, that of the 4th Marines. As Marine LVTs crossed the reef, Japanese guns opened up from all directions.
Going over the the reef, the artillery from the enemy seemed to increase a great deal. Then in the lagoon, we started to take even small arms fire, machine gun fire.
A lot of our Amtraks get blown up in the water, completely destroyed the personnel and the Amtrak. It was a lot rougher than we thought.
So we were all hunched down in the Amtrak, some praying, some swearing, everyone concerned.
When the landing craft finally hit the beaches, 8,000 Marines stormed ashore in just 20 minutes.
As I stepped out of my LVT, carrying my carbine, an enemy sniper actually hit my carbine right in the magazine. And it was several minutes before I was able to pick up a weapon of a Marine who had fallen.
Under heavy frontal fire, the Marines gained the tree line along the beach, but the Japanese reacted instantly.
They just came out of nowhere, screaming and hollering and waving their swords and firing at you and throwing grenades and whatever. If they could keep you on the shore, they had you beat.
All the time, Japanese guns continued to fire on the Marines from positions inland. But though the Marines were ashore, there was a problem. Strong currents offshore had pushed some of the landing craft away from their assigned beaches.
As we drifted farther to the left of the assigned beach area, every yard we went farther to the north was another yard we had to fight our way back down to carry out our mission.
The gap between the two Marine divisions widened as they fought inland. Against desperate Japanese resistance, American casualties began to mount.
Our principal objective then was to stay alive ourselves. Not day to day, but from 1 minute to the next.
The original invasion plan called for the LVTs to carry the Marines 2,000 yards inland to establish their bridgehead. But the LVTs attracted Japanese fire.
We got out of them as quickly as we could because they were a big target and they didn't bounce any shells off. They just took the shells and blew up.
12 noon. The American beachhead was still only 400 yards deep. In spite of the resistance, Marines headed for their first objective, the Japanese landing strip on the coast.
We managed to get through the tree line and took the fighter strip. At some loss. There's not much cover or concealment as you run across a fighter strip.
As evening came on, the order went out to land no more troops until daylight. Only half of the planned beachhead had been captured. The Japanese still controlled the high ground overlooking the landing beaches. In the vicious fighting on day one, 2,000 US Marines had been killed or wounded. The men ashore would have to cling to their positions overnight and wait for reinforcements. But General Saito's men were just as determined. They prepared a counterattack to punch through the Marine lines. The biggest tank attack of the Pacific Campaign was going to hit the Marines head on. The Battle of Saipan, Day 2. The men of the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions had held their narrow beachhead through a tense and deadly night. Reconnaissance aircraft recorded their advance to continue the battle for Saipan. The first obstacle was the ruined town of Charan Kanoa.
We were never trained to fight building to building and house to house. You know, you open a door and there'd be a bomb there, or a booby trap.
A Japanese observer was hidden at the top of a smokestack in a ruined sugar refinery. He called in mortar fire on the unsuspecting Marines.
There was some water available in Shirankanoa, and so we started immediately washing our faces and trying to get as comfortable as we could. And suddenly we're on our bellies, trying to dig holes with nothing but our chins and our fingernails and our knees. So within a matter of minutes, I was actually a few inches down lower than the soil where I started.
The smokestack was finally pulverized with artillery fire, and Shirankanoa was captured. But as Marines moved on to clear out Japanese bunkers, they faced a new tragedy: civilians on the battlefield.
We, of course, had to make sure there wasn't any enemy in those holes. And we did lose one fellow dead. He jumped down into the hole, and there was a very, very live Jap down there who shot him and killed him. After that, we decided, well, we'll put a grenade in there. The next one was occupied by a bunch of schoolgirls, little Chamorro girls in there. That was really a sad, sad thing. But I guess that kind of thing happens in war.
The Japanese knew they had to counterattack before more supplies and reinforcements arrived for the Marine divisions. They prepared for a night attack. From concealed positions in the hills near the town of Garapan, the Japanese force headed south to attack the Marine bridgehead. Spearheading the attack were 44 tanks of the Japanese 9th Tank Regiment. In support were 500 infantry and elite paratroopers from the Special Naval Landing Force. Marines of the 2nd Division heard the sound of engines coming from the darkness. The most powerful tank force ever used by the Japanese in an island battle was heading straight for them. The Marines opened fire at point-blank range as the horde of Japanese tanks roared out of the darkness.
They met us with their equipment, they met us with their tanks, they met us with their personnel. They were going to drive us back into the ocean. We were fortunate to be able to get them with anti-tank grenades, and we left them a pile of junk.
The largest Japanese tank attack of the Pacific Campaign had been obliterated.
The Japs lost 24 of their 40 tanks just on the second night, and they lost several hundred of their troops.
As day came, fresh American troops began to arrive in the bridgehead. This time, they were not combat-hardened Marines, but soldiers of the Green 27th Infantry Division. 7:30 a.m. The soldiers' first mission was to help extend the bridgehead. As the 2nd Division drove north towards Garapan, the 4th Marines and a regiment of the 27th Division headed south for Aslito Airfield. Aerial reconnaissance showed a neat checkerboard landscape of sugarcane fields in their path, but for the troops on the ground, it was a suffocating nightmare.
It seemed as though they tentacles. They just go around you, and you're fighting to get through them, and you don't know who's on your left and who's on your right.
As soon as we realized that they were hiding in these cane fields, we actually started setting the cane fields on fire. And this would force the Japanese out, and then there'd be a real rabbit shoot.
In spite of desperate Japanese resistance, the American bridgehead had doubled in size.
The Japanese were fighting for land that they considered essential to the empire. Therefore, they were dug in everywhere they could, and imbued with their spirit of fighting, they would fight to the last drop of blood.
Japanese medical orderly Taro Kawaguchi and his comrades were stunned by the power of the American attack.
The strafing by enemy planes is terrible, and because of the constant naval bombardment, it is impossible to leave the safety of our shelters.
The advance across Saipan continued. In the south, the 4th Marines reached the east coast, and with the 27th Infantry captured Aslito airfield. Japanese forces in the south of the island were now cut off.
We found a big stash of sake and Rising Sun beer, and we drank quite a bit of it. And the word came out: don't drink any liquids that you find around. They've all been booby-trapped and they're poison. We're all looking at each other and wondering, well, when are we going to die? Turned out it was a false alarm, much to our happiness.
But for the Japanese on Saipan, there was no celebrating. From Tokyo, Prime Minister General Tojo sent a radio message to the garrison.
Because the fate of the Japanese Empire depends on the result of your operation, inspire the spirit of officers and men, and to the very end, continue to destroy the enemy gallantly and persistently. Thus alleviate the anxiety of our emperor.
While Japanese troops fought desperately on Saipan, another battle was about to take place at sea. In one of the most decisive naval engagements of the war, the Japanese Imperial Navy tried to destroy the Saipan invasion fleet. The battle that followed would go down in history as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. June the 19th, 1944. US forces now controlled the southern third of Saipan. Marines and soldiers prepared to continue their battle for the island. But when they looked out to sea, a shock went through the entire invasion force.
Well, it was pretty leery when you look out there in the ocean and there's no ships. Wasn't a ship in sight.
Their naval support had been called away to deal with a new threat. Japan had sent its most powerful fleet to help the trapped garrisons in the Marianas. The Japanese fleet consisted of 9 aircraft carriers, 5 battleships, and 13 cruisers. More important were its 500 aircraft. If they could reach out and obliterate the US fleet, the invasion force would be trapped. A signal went out to every ship in the Japanese fleet.
The fate of the Empire rests on this one battle. Every man must do his utmost.
But US submarines spotted the Japanese ships as they approached the Marianas. The warning went out to the US fleet off Saipan to prepare for battle, and they moved out into the Philippine Sea to meet the enemy head-on. 200 miles west of Saipan, the first Japanese airstrike of dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and fighters was launched. Warned by their radar, the 15 American carriers sent 300 Hellcat fighters to take them on. Before the aircraft could make contact, American submarines made a daring attack on the Japanese carriers. Two were ripped open by torpedoes, and fuel leaks triggered colossal explosions which blew them apart. First blood to the Americans. "50 miles from the American carriers, the opposing air groups finally met.
It was really a slaughter. You could hear the battle, and we, of course, we knew a lot of the people that were jabbering on the air, but I've just become an ace. There goes 5.
Driven back, the surviving Japanese aircraft tried to fly to air bases in the Marianas to refuel and rearm. But US planes sprang a deadly ambush.
You can't believe what 650 calibers can do to a plane like a Zero. I remember shooting down one of them. When it was 50 caliber, the thing just became confetti. It just exploded practically.
By 12 noon, 4 Japanese airstrikes had been obliterated. American pilots called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japan had made a terrible mistake in its pilot training.
The Japanese would keep their aviators in battle indefinitely, which meant you're gradually going to lose all your experienced aviators, and the trainees back in Japan will gain none of the benefit of their knowledge.
The Japanese pilots were no match for the American flyers. Nearly 300 Japanese aircraft had been destroyed in just one day. As night fell, the Japanese pulled back. But the battle was not over. June the 20th, 1944, dawn. Determined to destroy the Japanese fleet once and for all, American reconnaissance aircraft spent the morning hunting for the enemy. At 4:15 p.m., a US scout plane signaled enemy in sight. The American carriers went into action. Brushing aside the Japanese fighters, the Americans aimed straight for the carriers. After only 20 minutes, another carrier had been sunk, 2 more damaged, and all but 35 of the remaining Japanese aircraft had been shot down. But the American aircraft had flown so far they were running out of fuel, and night was falling.
They realized that if we were going to get the airplanes back, they had to be able to land immediately, so they lighted the whole flight decks on all the carriers. Oh, it was unbelievable.
80 US planes crashed on carriers or ditched in the sea. Another 35 had been lost in combat. But in 2 days, 426 Japanese aircraft had been shot down.
The far more experienced American aviators went into battle and destroyed the air arm of the Japanese in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. It was a slaughter in the skies.
The aircraft carriers, which had spearheaded Japan's advance across the Pacific, were now empty hulks. The Japanese Navy was powerless to help the troops in the Marianas. While so much destruction had been taking place at sea, on Saipan itself, American progress had been painfully slow.
It took forever. You'd go a couple hundred yards or something a day, and nightfall would come, and you'd stop and dig a hole, and we started hoping that they would attack you, because that's the only way you could get them.
With the Japanese garrison fighting for every inch of ground, victory was still nowhere in sight. And now the Americans had to enter the worst terrain on Saipan, the hell they would call Death Valley. 8 days after the landings on Saipan, American troops were still fighting for control of the island. By mid-afternoon, the vital airfield at Hazlito was ready to operate fighter aircraft. P-47 Thunderbolts of the 19th Fighter Squadron flew constant missions in support of the ground troops. But Azlito also provided a base for reconnaissance aircraft. Within minutes of takeoff, they were flying over Japanese positions. Working in range of enemy fire, the photographic teams rushed the images straight to staff planning the next stage of the advance. By day 9, the US invasion force had cut right across Saipan. Now they had to attack the Japanese main line of resistance in the center of the island. Facing them were 15,000 Japanese. Among them was Taro Kawaguchi.
We received heavy casualties due to concentrated fire by land units and tanks, and took refuge on top of the mountain. Ordered by the commander to be prepared to attack the enemy with rifles, grenades, or bayonets.
The Marine divisions pushed north up the east and west coasts of Saipan. Between them, the 27th Infantry headed straight into some of the worst terrain in the Pacific. Soon it would earn the name Death Valley.
You dread the next day, you do, because it's going to be the same things all over again. Kill or be killed. And there was a lot of killing. There was no quarter given either way.
For the next 5 days, progress was agonizingly slow. The ridges and ravines around 1,500-foot Mount Tapachau were honeycombed with Japanese gun emplacements and bunkers. They had camouflaged their positions so skillfully that advancing American troops walked right into them.
One time I was cleaning my rifle, and I saw the ground open up, and there was a sniper there. And he started firing. I ducked. Probably 20 or 30 guys fired back at him. They killed him.
But again and again, the Marines' advance was held up by the 27th Infantry's lack of progress in the center of the line. The GIs seemed too cautious to the Marines.
The Army Division tended to start a little bit slower in the morning and would start with a big preparation of machine guns and rifles and whatnot, whereas we would move out until we contacted the enemy. That's when we would open up with our fire.
June the 24th. The flanks of the Marine divisions were taking enemy fire because the Army hadn't kept up with their rate of advance. General Holland Smith had had enough. He fired the commander of the 27th Infantry Division.
And I think it was a good move because he didn't want to see the Marine forces absorb casualties because, in his opinion, the Army forces couldn't keep up. He wasn't out to get the Army, he just wanted to get people moving.
The changes at the top didn't alter things for the men in their foxholes. Day after day, under a baking sun and short of water, they struggled on. Japanese snipers picked off the leaders, and concealed machine guns blasted patrols inching their way forward.
There was hand grenades, there was bayonets, there was K-knives, there was butts of rifles. It was fight and counterfight, all the way to the end.
At last, a small detachment of Marines from the 2nd Division captured the summit of Mount Tapachau. They beat back repeated counterattacks, and the Japanese defense in the center of the island began to crumble.
It was not easy taking casualties because the dead and wounded had to be gotten down Mount Tapachau, and that was done hand to hand. It was a labor of love when you were moving a dead Marine down a hill like that.
The 27th Division, under its new commander, Major General George W. Greiner, drove ahead to line up with the Marine divisions on the coast. In a week of continuous combat, 1,400 men of the 27th Infantry Division had been killed and wounded in the fight for Death Valley. Day 19. As the Japanese in the center of the island pulled back to the north, a regiment of the 2nd Marine Division attacked the town of Garapan.
The problem was that they used corrugated iron sheets for their roofs, and they were all over the place. They dug a hole underneath and pulled one of those sheets over. That kind of fighting was new to us. And I had 3 guys down in no time at all.
July the 5th, 1944. After a 2-week-long struggle for the mountainous center of Saipan, American forces had captured 3/4 of the island. 12 noon, General Holland M. Smith launched the final push to reach northern Saipan. The advance was still held up by die-hard Japanese.
And this Jap was lying on his stomach, and he must have heard my footsteps as he turned over, and he had a pistol. And I, of course, put a couple rounds into him and I just looked at his face. He was blind. He was completely blind. And he was fighting, going to kill one more American if he could.
Only a short distance to the north was the last command post of General Saito. Under constant shell fire from both US warships and artillery, it was in an area the Americans called Paradise Valley. The Japanese called it the Valley of Hell. July the 6th, General Saito gave a last order for the defense of Saipan.
Whether we attack or whether we stay where we are, there is only death. However, in death, there is life. I will advance with you to deliver another blow to the American devils and
The order that General Saito sent to his last troops called for a gyokusai, better known as a banzai attack. It was a death sentence for Japanese soldiers. In a gyokusai attack, units had to fight on until they were totally destroyed.
They fully intended to give their lives. The word that the general had given them in his proclamation was, take 7 American devils' lives before giving up your own. 7 for what?
Having issued the gyokusai order, General Saito had a last meal of tinned crab meat and sake. Then, with the help of his staff, he committed ritual suicide. One of the Japanese soldiers who would follow Saito's order was Taro Kawaguchi. He wrote the last entry in his diary.
Facing the dawn, the north, bowing reverently to the imperial palace, and bidding farewell to my parents, aunt and wife, I solemnly promise to do my utmost.
At 4:45 a.m., the last Japanese attack of the Battle for Saipan began. Starting from Paradise Valley, more than 3,000 troops moved south. The biggest banzai attack of the war was about to hit the American line. Gathering speed like a tidal wave, the mass of yelling Japanese soldiers crashed down on the positions of the 105th Infantry Regiment.
So all you could see is Japanese running, hundreds. Well, they come at us with everything now. They come at us with pitchforks, knives. They all didn't have guns.
And we watched all the firing and the screaming and the hollering, and you didn't know how effective you were. You were just firing in the dark.
I jumped into a foxhole with 3 men and a light machine gun. They were so overwhelmed, they didn't know what to do. I said, there's Japs out there, you gotta start firing. Well, right after that, the Japs raked the whole area with machine gun fire. And a minute or two later, we all picked up, we ran back.
Hurling their bodies against American firepower, the Japanese overwhelmed their enemy. On both sides, no quarter was asked or given. It was kill or be killed.
So I jumped in a ravine and I turned around and emptied another clip at the Japs. And all of a sudden I found out I was alone. I looked to my right, nobody. I looked to my left, nobody. I turned around and that's when the shell lobbed right over my head. It went off on the side of the ravine, even with my face.
A desperate fight developed at the command post of the 1st Battalion of the 105th. The battalion's commanding officer was William O'Brien. With a pistol in each hand, he fired into the mass of Japanese, defending his position to the end. The first mad rush of Japanese soldiers became a series of scattered hand-to-hand fights wherever US troops managed to take up positions. Medics risked their lives to rescue the wounded.
I lost the sight of an eye. I got shrapnel in my neck, shrapnel in my arm. I just went to my knees, made the sign of the cross, I started praying. And all of a sudden this medic came. He bandaged me up and brought me back to the beach.
Though broken into small pockets, the American line held. Fighting continued all day, and by 6 p.m., the lost ground was again in American hands. For all its ferocity, the largest banzai charge of the Pacific War had failed. July the 8th, 1944, day 24. When daylight came, the carnage was terrible. Bodies covered the plain and the beach. More than 4,000 dead Japanese were buried over the next few days. The 105th Infantry Regiment had suffered terrible casualties. More than 900 men had been killed and wounded, as well as 127 Marines. 3 men of the regiment were awarded the Medal of Honor for giving their lives to turn back the Japanese attack. One of them was Lieutenant Colonel William O'Brien. Though the fighting was over, Saipan had one more horror for these young Americans. The Japanese civilians on the island had been brainwashed by propaganda.
They were so afraid of us because of what the Japanese soldiers had told them we would do to them. They fully expected to be tortured, raped, and murdered brutally. There were times when as many as 700 in one day committed suicide by jumping over cliffs.
We tried to stop them. They were so afraid of us from this propaganda that they threw their babies over and then jumped after them. It was horrible.
But Japanese-American interpreters persuaded many civilians to surrender. Ragged and starving, they emerged from their hiding places.
When we gave them candy and food and everything, it made it almost worthwhile. At least we got a few of them saved.
On July the 9th, 1944, the commanders of the invasion force finally declared the island of Saipan secure. The 24 days of the battle had seen some of the hardest fighting of the Pacific campaign. Against desperate resistance, soldiers and Marines had fought their way yard by yard to final victory. But the cost had been terrible. nearly 3,500 soldiers and Marines had been killed and more than 13,000 wounded. For Japan, the fall of Saipan was the beginning of the end. Her last naval air force had been destroyed, and her inner defensive line was in ruins. General Tojo, the man who had masterminded Japan's war in the Pacific, fell from power. The Japanese realized that American bombers based on Saipan's captured airfields could now reach Japan itself.
That led one of the top officers, after studying reports of the campaign, to just summarize, hell is on us. He knew that the bombers, the American factories are turning out by the hundreds, would be soon over the skies. And it would be a matter of, okay, now the war's right at our doorsteps. Hell is on us.
Japanese troops on Saipan had shown how fanatically they would fight in defense of their own territory. The Americans who defeated them knew that the closer they got to Japan, the tougher resistance would be.
Each island was harder. Each island lot more casualty. Each island was more fighting. Each island was more death and destruction.
They really were a very determined foe, and nothing came easily.
But the courage of the young men who had broken Japan's defensive line had brought the end of the war one step closer.